It was the kind of dinner you replay in your mind over and over. Not because it was perfect, but because it cracked something in you that you didn't know was still holding on. Thanksgiving in our house had always been more of a show than a celebration. Polished silverware, deep mahogany furniture that was only used once a year, and floral centerpieces that Mom insisted on ordering from the same upscale florist in downtown Charleston. Everything had to look just right, smell just right, sound just right. Even our laughter was curated. That night, I sat wedged between my cousin Lila and my father, who had long ago mastered the art of keeping quiet when things got uncomfortable. Across the table, Daniel, my older brother, basked in the glow of Mom's praise. He had just accepted a job at one of those finance firms with glass buildings and rooftop cocktail events. Everyone clapped. Mom actually teared up. And then came the moment that still feels like a bruise when I think about it. Okay, someone joked. Maybe Uncle Jeff, maybe Lila, I don't even remember anymore. But who's your favorite, huh? Mom didn't even blink. Daniel, she said, her voice lilting with pride. Of course, he's always been the one I could count on. The room erupted in laughter, forks hitting plates, wine glasses chiming. I smiled too. Not because it was funny, not because it was surprising, but because that's what I always did. I smiled through the sting, through the invisible slap across the face, through the confirmation that I had always been the background character in my own family story. I made it an hour after that before slipping away. Said I had work early. No one asked me to stay. As I drove home, I didn't cry. I just turned up the music, let the cold night air rush through the cracked window, and reminded myself of something I'd learned years ago. You can't miss what you never really had. That was the last Thanksgiving I would ever spend with my mother. 2 months later, she was gone. A sudden heart attack in her sleep. No warnings, no hospital visits, no drawn out goodbyes. Just a phone call on a rainy Tuesday from Daniel, voice low and confused. She's gone. I didn't know what to feel. Not exactly. Grief wasn't it, not in the way people talk about it. It wasn't waves of uncontrollable sobbing or clutching her old sweaters. It was more like static, numbness, like I was watching someone else's tragedy unfold. The truth was, I had been grieving my mother for years, grieving the moment she never gave me, the kindness she reserved only for Daniel, the warmth that never extended in my direction. When she died, part of me thought, now I'll never get it. Never get that one moment where she looks at me and says she's proud. And yet, even that thought didn't bring tears, just silence. The funeral was cold in every way. Charleston winters are mild, but that morning, the sky was gray and heavy, and the wind had teeth. People spoke kindly of her, said she was strong, elegant, a pillar of the community. No one mentioned the favoritism. No one mentioned how she could make you feel like a guest in your own home. I stood in the back of the church, alone, while Daniel gave the eulogy. He cried, real tears, and for a second I envied him. Not because he had her love, but because he believed in it. 3 weeks later, the call came from the lawyer's office, a reading of the will. I didn't even want to go, but something in me, curiosity maybe, or duty, made me say yes. I told myself not to expect anything, maybe a necklace, maybe a line in the will, acknowledging I existed. I wasn't hoping for money. I just wanted a trace of intention. When we walked into the office, wood-paneled walls, too many leather chairs, the smell of cologne and old paper, I kept my coat on. Daniel looked relaxed, confident. He assumed, rightfully so, that he would inherit everything. He was already talking about listing the house. Then the lawyer began to speak, and with each sentence, the floor beneath us seemed to shift. To my daughter, he read, who showed me what quiet strength looks like. I thought it was a mistake, a mix-up. I actually turned to Daniel, expecting him to correct it. Who visited me when I was sick, who never asked for love but gave it anyway. I leave everything. Daniel blinked. What? The lawyer didn't flinch. He continued reading legal terms, asset lists, instructions, everything. The house, the accounts, the stocks, all of it. To me. Daniel's face turned the color of old bricks. There has to be a mistake, he said, voice tight. There's no mistake, the lawyer replied calmly. Your mother updated her will 3 months ago. She was very clear. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I sat there watching the moment unravel, unsure if I was breathing. My hands trembled in my lap and my mind couldn't catch up. She left me everything? The same woman who once forgot to bring a candle to my 12th birthday cake? Who left my graduation early because Daniel had a track meet? The lawyer handed me a sealed envelope. My name was written on it in shaky handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a note, only a few lines. I didn't know how to love you the right way, but I always admired you. I hope this is my apology. Mom. I reread it 5 times. The words blurred together. She never said it out loud. Not at Thanksgiving, not in front of everyone. But now with her gone, she was trying to say it in ink. I didn't know whether to feel seen or betrayed. I didn't know what to believe anymore. But deep down, something told me this was only the beginning. Because apologies like that, they always come with something hidden underneath. The first time I stepped back into my mother's house after the will reading, it felt like walking into a museum curated by someone who never thought I'd be the one holding the key. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every vase and drape screamed of her, of control, of a woman who cared more about appearances than affection. The air inside was heavy with that faint mix of lavender and lemon polish, like she'd just been there, straightening a cushion or inspecting a lampshade for dust. I walked slowly, room to room, trailing my fingers along the polished surfaces like I was looking for fingerprints, for proof that something had changed, that this place, this fortress of favoritism, was now mine. I ended up in her bedroom, which I never dared enter when she was alive. It was exactly as I expected, immaculate, cold, and too perfect to feel like someone actually lived there. The bed was made with tight hospital corners, the closet organized by color and season, and on the dresser was a silver-framed photo of Daniel. Not of both of us, just him. I don't know what I was hoping to find in there. Maybe another letter, a diary, a hidden drawer full of motherly remorse. Instead, I found silence, and that silence settled in my chest like a stone. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings with lawyers, paperwork, financial advisors. Every time someone referred to me as the sole beneficiary, I felt like an imposter, like I was holding on to something that was never meant for me. Daniel had stopped calling. Not that we spoke much before, but now the silence between us felt thick with resentment. I heard through my aunt that he was contesting the will. I wasn't surprised. He'd grown up with the certainty that everything would fall into his lap eventually. Our mother had made sure of that. But what shook me was what came next. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through my mother's documents in the study, I found a small fireproof safe tucked behind a row of old cookbooks. It was wedged behind a stack of outdated travel guides, like it had been hidden on purpose. I almost missed it entirely. I sat on the floor, heart thudding, and tried a few combinations, birthdays, anniversaries, until, by sheer instinct, I typed in Daniel's birthday. Click. Inside were 3 things: a stack of old letters bound with ribbon, a faded photograph, and a USB drive. The letters were addressed to a name I didn't recognize, Michael Brennan, each one written in my mother's unmistakable cursive. The earliest was dated over 30 years ago. I stared at the name, the dates, the carefully folded pages. There had never been a Michael in any family story, no tales of lost love or secret regrets. But the letters told a different story. They weren't romantic, not exactly. They were confessional, emotional, filled with guilt, longing, and something else I couldn't quite name. She wrote about regret, about choices, about 2 children growing up under very different shadows. She mentioned protecting Daniel and not wanting to disrupt his world. She mentioned me too, but only vaguely. always as her. My heart began to race as I read. The letters hinted at something buried deep, something my mother had carried with her to the grave. I flipped through them until I found one dated only a year ago. If I could go back, I would tell her the truth. She deserved that much. But I was a coward. I thought silence was protection. I know now it was cruelty. I sat there on the floor, numb, the paper trembling in my hands. What truth? What silence? I picked up the photograph. It was yellowed at the edges, a candid shot of my mother sitting on a park bench with a man I didn't recognize. He looked kind, soft eyes, a gentle smile. She was laughing in the photo, really laughing, the way I'd never seen her laugh in real life. Was this Michael Brennan? Was this the truth she never told? The USB drive stared up at me like a ticking bomb. I plugged it into my laptop and found a single audio file. No label, no date. I hit play. My mother's voice filled the room, calmer than I'd ever heard it, slower, almost nervous. If you're listening to this, I'm gone. And I know you have questions. I don't know how else to say this except plainly. Daniel isn't your full brother, not by blood, and the man you knew as your father. He isn't yours. I stopped breathing. You were the result of a moment in my life when I was trying to be someone I wasn't. Your real father was kind. He wanted to be in your life, but I shut the door on that. I didn't want anyone to know, especially not Daniel's father, especially not Daniel. It wasn't about shame. It was about fear. I built a lie and then forced myself to live inside it. And in doing so, I pushed you away. Tears welled in my eyes, but I couldn't stop listening. Her voice cracked near the end, a sound I had never heard from her, not in anger, not in grief. I failed you in ways you'll never fully understand. But if there's one thing I need you to believe, it's this. I never stopped loving you. I just didn't know how to love you out loud. The file ended. Just like that. No dramatic goodbye, no final plea, just static and silence. I sat there in the study, surrounded by boxes of her things, letters from a past I never knew existed, and the weight of a secret that changed everything. Daniel wasn't just her favorite, he was someone else's son, and I wasn't who I thought I was. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, the ceiling fan spinning shadows across the walls, thinking about every moment of my life that had been shaped by a lie. My mother's voice kept playing in my head, broken and soft, trying to apologize across time. The woman who couldn't give me love in life had given me the truth in death. But I didn't know if I could hold it. It didn't feel like closure. It felt like disorientation. Like the ground I'd always walked on was suddenly sand. The next morning I opened the letters again, this time carefully, methodically. I read every one, front to back, highlighting anything that might point to this man, this Michael Brennan. There were references to cities, Asheville, Raleigh, Wilmington. One letter talked about a bookstore he used to own, called Blue Lantern Books. Another mentioned how he used to write her poems and leave them in her car, folded into the visor. There were no last names in most of them, no addresses. But it was enough. I didn't know what I was trying to find. Maybe I just wanted proof that he was real, that I wasn't built entirely on fiction. I spent hours online, chasing any breadcrumb. And then, buried in an old business directory, I found a listing. Blue Lantern Books, Michael Brennan, Crayon, closed 2009. There was a blurry photo of the storefront, a cozy little brick building with a navy awning. It existed. He existed. I stared at that listing for what felt like forever, heart thudding like I was standing on the edge of something massive. I was 29 years old, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure who I was. I thought about reaching out, finding him, asking the questions my mother never let me ask. But part of me was terrified. What if he didn't want to know me? What if he had a new family now? A new life built on the absence I'd lived with for so long? And then there was Daniel. I hadn't told him anything yet. I hadn't even answered his texts, angry, sharp messages demanding answers about the will. He was unraveling, And I couldn't blame him. His whole identity had been wrapped in our mother's approval. Without it, who was he? But now I held the truth, and it wasn't just about inheritance or favoritism. It was about blood, legacy, a fracture neither of us saw coming. Days passed. I wandered the house like a stranger, avoiding the rooms where her presence was strongest. I tried to decide what to do about the will, about Daniel, about Michael Brennan. Eventually, I found myself packing a small bag. I told no one. I just got in my car and drove. It took 5 hours to reach the address I'd found, a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Asheville. The bookstore was long gone, replaced by a boutique cafe, but I stood across the street for a long time anyway, staring at the brick building like it might recognize me. Something about it made my throat tighten. Maybe it was the idea that he had stood there once, maybe many times, unaware that his daughter would one day come looking. Through some careful online digging, I had found a possible home address. I wasn't sure it was still valid, but it was all I had. I drove there slowly, heart in my throat. It was a small house with a wraparound porch, wind chimes clinking in the breeze. There were flower pots on the steps and a faded welcome mat that read, "Come as you are." I sat in my car for 20 minutes, palms sweating against the steering wheel. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked pale and uncertain. I didn't even know what I'd say. "Hi, I think I'm your daughter?" It felt absurd. But I got out anyway, walked up the steps, knocked. A woman answered, gray hair pulled back into a ponytail, eyes crinkled kindly at the corners. She didn't know me, but she didn't seem surprised to see a stranger either. When I asked for Michael Brennan, she hesitated. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "You just missed him." My stomach dropped. She must have seen the panic in my face because she reached for my arm. "He passed away last year. Heart failure. I was his neighbor and friend. Are you family?" I couldn't speak for a moment. I just nodded. Then finally I whispered, "Maybe." She invited me in, made me tea I didn't drink. She showed me a photo on the mantel. Him, older than the picture I'd found in the safe, but still with those kind eyes, still with that soft smile. I cried then, silently, in a stranger's living room, mourning a man I never got to meet, a man I would never know if he ever thought of me. She handed me a small box, said he'd left it with her in his final days, in case someone came looking. Inside was a weathered notebook, a stack of postcards, and a single envelope with my name on it, Grace, written in handwriting that matched the letters from the safe. I didn't open it there. I thanked her, drove to a nearby overlook, and sat on a bench surrounded by silence. When I finally tore open the envelope, I found just a single page. "I always hoped someday you'd come. I never knew what your mother told you, or if you'd even know I existed. But if you're reading this, then I want you to know. I loved you. I always did. I tried to reach out once. She said no. I respected her choice. But I kept your birthday on my calendar every year. I lit a candle for you. And I prayed wherever you were that you'd be okay, that you'd grow up strong, brave, loved. I hope you forgive me for being a ghost." I don't know how long I sat there, holding that letter like it was the only thing tethering me to the earth. I'd spent so much of my life chasing scraps of love from a woman who didn't know how to give it. And all along, someone out there had carried me in his heart like a secret prayer. I felt both full and hollow. And now I had to return home, to Daniel, to a truth that would ruin what little we had left. I drove home in silence. No music, no podcasts, just the hum of the tires on asphalt and the rhythmic throbbing in my temples. That letter, the one my father had left, felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. Not in weight, but in meaning. For 29 years, I'd believed a version of my life that had been carefully curated by a woman obsessed with control, image, and silence. And in the course of 2 weeks, it had all unraveled. When I pulled into my driveway, Daniel's car was already there. I froze. I hadn't seen him since the reading of the will. Part of me had hoped he'd give me space. Another part knew better. He was sitting on the porch steps, arms crossed, foot tapping. His expression tightened when he saw me, jaw clenched like he was trying not to explode. I stepped out of the car slowly, already bracing myself. "You finally decide to show up," he said, voice low, controlled, too controlled. I nodded, unsure how to start. I needed time. He stood, took a few steps toward me. "Time? Grace? Mom died, then blindsided us with that damn will, and you just disappear." "I didn't disappear," I said quietly. "I was looking for answers." "Answers?" His laugh was sharp, bitter. "The only answer I want is why she left everything to you. Everything. I'm the one who took care of her. I was there every holiday, every doctor's appointment. You were the distant one, remember?" I flinched. He didn't know, couldn't know, what it felt like to be in the same room as her and still feel invisible. "I found something in her things," I said, swallowing hard. "Letters, old ones, from a man named Michael Brennan." Daniel stared at me confused. "Who?" "Her lover? For years. My real father." The word sat between us like a dropped bomb. His face twisted in disbelief, then darkened. "What are you talking about?" "She had an affair," I said, voice trembling. "It started before I was born. He wanted to be part of my life. She wouldn't let him. And when she found out she was pregnant with me, she told him to stay away. I found letters from him, and then I found him." Daniel stepped back like I'd slapped him. "No, no, that's not. Mom would never." "She did," I said. "And she told me in a letter that she always admired me, that this inheritance was her way of apologizing, because she knew what she took from me." He paced the porch, hands on his hips, like he was trying to rearrange the universe in his mind. "You're lying," he finally said. "You're making this up to justify stealing what's mine." "I'm not," I said. "I didn't ask for any of this, but it's the truth." "No." He pointed at me, trembling. "The truth is you were always jealous, always sulking, always distant. And now that she's gone, you're trying to rewrite everything to make yourself look like some tragic heroine." I didn't respond. What could I say? He was spiraling, trying to grasp at the only identity he'd ever known. "You're not even my sister," he spat, and that broke something in me. I stepped closer, tears stinging my eyes. "Do you think I wanted this? To find out that my mother spent her life pretending? That the man who raised me wasn't even my real father? That she gave everything to me in death but never gave me an ounce of love in life?" He looked away, jaw tight. "I never competed with you, Daniel," I said, softer now. "You were always the favorite. I made peace with that a long time ago. But don't accuse me of stealing something that was never yours to begin with." We stood there in silence, the kind that doesn't soothe, it cuts. Eventually, he turned and walked down the porch steps. He didn't say goodbye, didn't look back, just got in his car and drove off. I didn't see him for weeks after that. The house felt cavernous and cold. Her perfume still lingered in the master bedroom, faint but persistent, like she was still haunting the space. I started sorting through her things, not out of sentiment, but out of necessity. Every drawer was a time capsule, every photo a reminder of the life she chose to present to the world. In one of her journals, I found something strange. Pages ripped out, sections scribbled over, like she'd been trying to erase parts of herself even in private. But in the back, tucked behind the final page, I found a photograph. It was me, maybe 6 years old, sitting on a bench beside a man I didn't recognize at first. He had his arm around me. I was smiling, genuinely. And he was looking at me. Not like someone posing for a picture, but like someone watching his child. It was Michael Brennan. I gasped, my knees given out beneath me. She'd let me see him, once, maybe for a few stolen moments. And then she'd buried the memory. Suddenly, everything clicked. The disconnected memories of a bookstore visit I couldn't place. The time she told me we were going on a day trip, but never explained where. She let me meet him once, then erased it. But he remembered. He kept a candle lit every year. And that meant she'd chosen her pride, her secrecy, her curated family fantasy over my right to know my own story. I couldn't protect her anymore. And I couldn't protect Daniel from it either, because the truth, it was about to unravel his life too. I didn't sleep that night. The photo haunted me, proof that my mother had cracked once, just once, and let him in. Proof that she'd known deep down that keeping him away wasn't right. She tried to undo it, in her own twisted way, through the inheritance, through that final letter, but it wasn't enough. Not anymore. The next morning I printed copies of the letters and the photo. Not out of spite, at least, or that's what I told myself, but because I knew what came next. This wasn't a secret I could carry alone anymore, and if I didn't give Daniel the truth, someone else eventually would. He deserved to know, even if it broke him, even if it broke us. I didn't call, I didn't text. I just drove to his apartment and knocked. When he opened the door, his face was stone. Tired eyes, unshaven face. He didn't say a word, just stepped aside, letting me in like it was a formality, not an invitation. We sat in silence at his kitchen table. I slid the folder across to him. For a moment, he didn't touch it. Then he opened it, flipping through slowly. He read every word. I watched his lips tighten as he took in each line, the neat script, the postmarked envelopes. When he got to the photo, he stopped, stared, then looked up at me, and for the first time in our lives, I saw something crack in him. "This man?" he whispered. "You met him?" I nodded. "Once. I didn't remember until I found the photo." He leaned back, the weight of it all folding him inward. "So, Dad, he wasn't your father?" "No," I said softly, "but he raised me, even if he never really saw me." Daniel looked down at the table, then back at the photo. "She let you meet him, then erased it." "She wanted control," I said. "Always did." He didn't argue, just sat there, shoulders sagging. After a long while, he spoke again. "She ruined everything." And he wasn't wrong. Because when a parent dies, you don't just lose them. You lose the story you told yourself about who they were. And when that story turns out to be a lie, you start to wonder what else you built your life on that was never really solid. I left him with the folder, told him he could do whatever he wanted with it. He didn't walk me out, but he didn't tell me to leave either. That felt like something. Back at the house, I finally went into the attic. I'd been avoiding it, afraid of what else I might find, or not find. Dust floated in the air like ghosts when I pushed the door open. Old furniture, boxes labeled with black marker, crates of childhood clothes and holiday ornaments. All things she'd kept, curated. But in the corner, under a pile of old linens, I found a locked box. Metal, heavy. I almost didn't open it. I almost walked away. But curiosity, no, obsession won. Inside were more letters. But not from Michael. They were from my father, the man who'd raised me, dozens of them, addressed to her, written after I was born, pleading, confused, angry. "You promised me she was mine. You made me believe. I see the way she looks at you and doesn't look at me. What have you done to her? If I find out she's not mine, I swear I'll—" And then they stopped. I sat on the attic floor, my hands shaking, heart hollowing out. He knew, or at least suspected, and she never admitted it. She let him live out his life with that gnawing doubt. No paternity test, no truth, just silence, just control. That's when I realized she hadn't just stolen my father from me. She'd stolen me from him. He died thinking I might have been a lie. That's why he kept his distance. Why the affection was always polite, never tender. She poisoned that relationship before it ever had a chance. And still, she'd left me everything. A sick, tangled legacy of guilt. The following week, I found myself outside Michael Brennan's door again. I hadn't planned on returning, but there I was. He opened it with the same soft eyes. No questions, just a quiet, "You came back." Inside, the air smelled of old books and rain. I handed him the photo. I remembered. I said. He looked at it, his hand trembling. Then tears filled his eyes. He didn't wipe them away. I carried that moment for 23 years, he said. It was the only time I ever held you. I never forgot how you smiled. We sat for hours. He told me things I didn't know I'd needed to hear. Stories about how he met my mother, how she changed after marrying my father, how she told him to stay away for good once she was pregnant. He said he wrote to me every year, even if he never sent them. Said he kept photos of me clipped from yearbooks, always watching from a distance. I didn't want to hurt you, he said. I just wanted you to know you were loved, even if you never heard it. And that was the final fracture, the last piece of the story. My mother had spent her life managing appearances, but the truth she tried to bury had still bloomed in him, in me. The next morning I called Daniel and told him to meet me at the cemetery. We stood there, side by side, staring at her headstone. No words for a while. She built this family like a house of cards, he said eventually. I nodded. And it fell the second someone breathed. He looked at me not as a rival or a thief, but as someone who'd been wronged just as deeply, maybe more. Do you think we'll ever be okay? He asked. I don't know, I admitted. But we can start with the truth, and maybe that was enough for now. But as we turned to leave, a man in a brown coat stepped from behind a tree. He looked nervous, mid-40s, holding something in his hands. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said. Are you Grace? I froze. Yes. He handed me an envelope. I think we're siblings. The words hit like a wave, silent but crushing. I think we're siblings. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat, too stunned to even react. Daniel stiffened beside me, instinctively stepping closer, his protective side kicking in, even though we were still fumbling our way through the wreckage of our shared past. The man held the envelope with both hands like it might explode. I took it slowly, as if it might confirm some new crack in the story I'd just begun to understand. He didn't offer a name, just nodded once, his face tight with some combination of guilt and fear, and walked away without saying another word. The envelope was unsealed. The paper inside yellowed slightly around the edges. I unfolded it with trembling fingers, my eyes scanning the faded writing. It wasn't from him, it was from her, my mother, to the child I never got to know. I stopped reading. My knees weakened. I sat right there on the damp grass, not caring if anyone stared. Daniel stood over me, his face drained of color. There were two things I thought I'd understood by now, that my mother had kept secrets, and that she'd chosen me in the end. But this rewrote the rules again. I forced myself to keep reading. You were never a mistake. I want you to know that. I couldn't keep you, and I won't justify the reasons here. They'll sound selfish, even if they were complicated. But I thought about you. Every birthday, every Christmas. I kept a photo in a drawer, one I never showed anyone. I just couldn't let you go entirely. I'm sorry I wasn't braver. The signature was unmistakable. Her name, written in the same looping script as the note she left me. But this one was dated 1984, 6 years before I was born. When I looked up, Daniel was staring at the paper like it might catch fire. She gave up another kid? He asked, stunned. Before us? I nodded, numb. Looks like it. She never said anything. Not to Dad, not to anyone. Of course she didn't. Because the one thing I now understood about my mother was that her entire life was a fortress of image. Every decision, every interaction, every lie was a brick in that wall. And maybe she convinced herself that some walls were built for protection. But this was a prison. For her. For all of us. I folded the letter and stood, brushing the dirt from my jeans. I need to know, I said. Daniel didn't argue. We didn't speak the rest of the drive, but I knew he understood. He needed answers too, because if we didn't dig them out now, they'd haunt us the way they had haunted her, silently, for decades. The man's address was listed on the envelope, just a few towns over. I'd no idea if he'd still be there or if he'd even welcome the visit, but I had to try. His house was modest: white siding, a cracked driveway, a sagging porch swing. A place where someone might try to live simply, maybe even anonymously. I knocked twice. This time, he opened the door slower. "I didn't mean to scare you earlier," he said quietly. I just, I saw you at the cemetery and I read the letter," I said. "I need to understand." He stepped aside. "Come in." His living room was sparse but clean. No photos, no clutter, just a few old books on a shelf and a faded rug underfoot. We sat across from each other in stiff wooden chairs like strangers at a confession. "I only found out 2 years ago," he began. "I was adopted, grew up not knowing anything. But after my adoptive mom passed, I found the paperwork. Her name was on it. Helen Cooper. My mother. I didn't know what to do at first," he continued. "I didn't want to blow up anyone's life, but then I found out she died. And I thought maybe someone would want to know." I nodded, still trying to keep my racing thoughts in order. "Do you know who your father was?" He shook his head. "No one's name was listed, just her." I felt like I was floating outside of my body. Another sibling, another hidden shame. Another life my mother had buried so deeply she probably thought it would never be unearthed. "What's your name?" I finally asked. "Ethan," he said, and then softly, "I've been following you. Not in a weird way, I promise. Just after I saw the obituary and your name in it, I started looking into you. I read articles, found your LinkedIn, saw you inherited everything, and I thought maybe she told you. Maybe she left something for me, too." Daniel shifted in his chair. "She didn't," he said, and not a word. "I didn't expect money," Ethan said quickly. "It's not about that. I just wanted to be acknowledged, to exist." And there it was again, that deep ache, that shared loneliness. We were all children of the same woman, each left in the shadow of her choices, trying to piece together a story that refused to stay still. "You do exist," I said quietly. "And we can't change what she did, but maybe we can try to figure out what we're supposed to do with it now." He smiled, shaky, uncertain, but real. "Thank you." Later that night, I found myself staring at my reflection in the dark window of my mother's old bedroom. The woman in the glass looked older somehow, more hollow, more sure. She had created a beautiful lie, one built on exclusion and shame and silence. And in the end, it didn't survive her, because the truth doesn't stay buried. It grows, it spreads, it surfaces when you least expect it. As I turned off the light, a thought crossed my mind, quiet but persistent. Maybe this wasn't just the end of her story. Maybe it was finally the beginning of mine. The days that followed blurred into a strange quiet. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that settles after a storm, when the winds are gone but everything's still broken. Daniel returned to his apartment, unsure how to process Ethan's existence. We agreed to give each other space. Too much had surfaced too fast, and I could tell he was unraveling behind that calm, practiced exterior. I stayed in the house, Mom's house, my house now. It felt foreign, even with her gone. Every piece of furniture screamed her name, carefully placed, dusted weekly, arranged for guests more than for comfort. I walked from room to room at night, feeling like an intruder in a museum curated by a woman I barely knew. But the bedroom was worst. Hers, not mine. I had avoided it for weeks, but one night I stood at the door and forced myself to step in. It was pristine, everything folded, hung, organized with military precision. The only sign of humanity was the faint smell of her perfume on the scarf draped over a chair. That scent transported me, not to warm memories, but to awkward hugs at holidays. Her cold cheek brushing mine, her lips stiff and distant. I opened her closet, not even sure what I was looking for anymore. A clue, a crack, something to make sense of the woman who had raised me like I was invisible, then handed me everything after her death. Boxes lined the top shelf. One of them was marked in sharp black ink. Private. I pulled it down. Inside were old letters, dried flowers, a tiny baby bracelet with the name Ethan engraved on it. I sat on the carpet, my heart thudding. I had seen her wear a necklace with a similar charm, but she always brushed off questions about it. Said it was just a trinket. That was a lie, like so many others. There were photos too, black and white, faded at the edges. Her, young and radiant, holding a baby boy. A note was scribbled on the back in her handwriting. 1984. My biggest mistake, my deepest love. It was so unlike her to write something that vulnerable, something that raw. I stared at it for what felt like an hour. She had loved him, at least in her own way. So why did she never speak of him? Why deny his existence even to herself? I placed the bracelet beside me and flipped through more papers. Hospital records. A letter from an adoption agency? Even an unmailed letter addressed to Ethan when he turned 18. I hope you forgive me. I hope you're better off without me. I wanted to be more, but I didn't know how. That line hit hardest because it was the same line that described her relationship with me. She didn't know how. Maybe she couldn't love in the way others did. Not openly, not easily. Maybe her love came out in awkward silences, in inheritance papers, in sealed letters and hidden boxes. It didn't excuse the damage, but it explained something. And yet, it wasn't enough. I closed the box and stood, something sharp growing in my chest. A resentment I thought I'd buried was back. Because for all her secrets, all her guilt, she never once gave me the love she had scribbled about in secret. She had abandoned Ethan, yes, but she'd made me feel abandoned in a house where she stood 3 feet away. A few days later, Ethan came by again. He stood on the porch, hands in his jacket pockets, his posture unsure. I invited him in, and we sat in the kitchen where my mother used to host brunches for the neighbors she couldn't stand. I gave him the box. He didn't open it right away, just stared at it, his mouth slightly open. She kept it, he whispered. All these years. She never mentioned you to anyone, I said, not even Daniel. He nodded slowly. I figured. She loved you, I added, almost bitterly. She just couldn't deal with the shame. Ethan's expression changed. He looked at me like he understood something I hadn't said. She loved you too, he said gently, in a different way. But she did. No, I snapped. She loved Daniel. I was just tolerated. Ethan was quiet. Then he said something that made me sit up. She might have treated you like a second choice, but she left you everything. Not Daniel, not me, you. I didn't reply, because deep down, I didn't know what to say. Had she been trying to make it right in the only way she knew how? Was this house, this money, this apology in a will her way of saying, I saw you even when I pretended not to? Or was it guilt? Ethan set the box down gently on the table, his fingers lingering on the lid. Do you ever think about what you'll do with it all? With what? The house, the inheritance, everything she left you. I hadn't. Not really. I had been living in a daze, floating from room to room like a ghost, but his question planted a seed. What was I going to do with all this? Keep it? Sell it? Use it to start over? The idea of starting over? It scared me, but maybe it was what I needed. That night I walked through the house again, room by room. This time I wasn't searching, I was saying goodbye. I found one last envelope taped under the drawer of her nightstand. It wasn't addressed. Inside was a single page. If you're reading this, then I failed at explaining in life what I could only say in death. I made choices I regret. I let fear win. But you were my quiet light. I am sorry I didn't say it when I had the chance. This house, this life, it's yours now. Do better than I did. I folded the letter slowly. There were no tears, just a quiet acceptance. Maybe I would never fully understand her. Maybe none of us would. But I had inherited more than just money. I had inherited the truth. And now I had to decide what to do with it. The days that followed felt heavier than I expected. The house, once filled with things that held no real meaning to me, now felt like a place that was mine. Not because I wanted it to be, but because it had been forced on me. It was a silent inheritance, passed down through years of lies and regret, and now I had to decide what to do with it. I stood by the window that evening, looking out over the familiar view of the city. The streetlights flickered on one by one, casting a soft glow across the pavement. Everything looked so still, and yet I was anything but. There was a buzzing in my head, a quiet hum that wouldn't let me rest. Every corner of this house felt like it was waiting for me to make a decision. I hadn't spoken to Daniel much after the will reading. He was lost in his own thoughts, trying to piece together the world that had shifted beneath his feet. I couldn't blame him for his anger, his confusion. He had been the one who thought he was the heir to it all, but now that place was mine. I could feel it deep in my bones, the weight of the decision hanging over me like a storm cloud. The lawyer had left me with the documents, proof of ownership, a breakdown of her assets, and the last of her investments. There was more money in her accounts than I'd ever imagined, more than enough to start fresh, more than enough to leave all this behind. But what was I running from? I already knew the answer. I was running from the past where I'd been invisible, forgotten, and ignored, running from a family that had built its foundation on a lie, the lie that I didn't matter, that I wasn't worth the effort. But as I sat there in that cold, sterile living room, a strange thing happened. I realized that the more I tried to escape, the more it felt like I was running into myself, running into the person I'd become because of all the hurt, the neglect, the betrayal. I couldn't keep looking over my shoulder forever. I couldn't keep seeking something that would never come. Not from Daniel, not from Ethan, and certainly not from a mother who had abandoned me in every way but one. I had to decide what to do with the truth. I had to decide whether to keep carrying the weight of this house, of these memories, or whether to let them go and start a life I could call my own. And that decision would come down to one simple truth. What did I want? By the time I walked into the kitchen, I had made up my mind. There were decisions to be made, real ones. Ones that didn't involve holding on to the past, but stepping into a future that was mine to create. The phone rang. It was Daniel. I hesitated before answering. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice thick with something I couldn't quite place. "I'm fine," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I'm just thinking about everything." "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all this," he said, and I could hear the exhaustion in his tone. "I'm angry, but I don't know who to be angry at anymore." "Don't be angry at anyone," I replied. "This isn't about us. It's about her, and we both know it's too late to fix anything with her." "I don't know what to do with this house, this inheritance," he muttered. "I feel like it should be mine, but I don't want it." I paused, considering his words. There was something in his voice that sounded like defeat, a soft weariness that I couldn't ignore. "You don't have to keep it," I said finally. "Neither of us does." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then he spoke, almost cautiously. "What are you going to do with it?" "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm not going to hold on to it just because I can." That was the truth. I wasn't going to cling to something that held no real meaning for me. The house, the money, the pieces of a life that I had never been part of. It was all just stuff. And what had my mother left me, really? A legacy of guilt and silence, and a reminder that love, even the kind that's hidden away, can't undo the damage it causes when it's kept locked behind closed doors. I had the power to let go now, and that was more than I'd ever had before. "I'm going to sell it," I told him. "I don't need it. I need to move on." "I understand," he said quietly, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "It's not worth holding on to, is it?" "No," I replied, the word tasting like freedom. "It's not." I hung up the phone and sat back, finally feeling a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. The decision was made. I had nothing left to prove, and no one left to impress. I could walk away, free of the past, free of the weight she had placed on my shoulders all these years. But even as I prepared to take that first step forward, a quiet voice in the back of my mind asked the question that had been haunting me all along. What if I'm not done yet? What if, deep down, I wasn't ready to let go of the past just yet? What if this house, this inheritance, was the key to something greater? It was a question I would have to answer. But not today, not right now. For tonight, I would rest. Tomorrow, I would begin. And whatever came next, I would face it with a strength I hadn't known I had until now. The decision to sell the house was not as simple as it seemed. In my head, it felt like the right choice, clear, clean, and final. Yet, in practice, it was like trying to step out of a shadow that clung to me no matter how fast I walked. I met with real estate agents, the paperwork piling up like a tower of bricks I wasn't ready to carry. Every time I walked through the front door, I felt the weight of it, the history that had been built in these walls, all the secrets, the resentments, the things left unsaid. It was suffocating. And yet, the house had become a sort of tether to the past. Selling it meant cutting the last thread that connected me to a family I didn't know if I could ever forgive. I spent my nights cleaning, sorting, and packing away memories. I found the most random things in the attic: an old tricycle, Daniel's baseball trophies from childhood, a drawer full of half-used candles. But the strangest discovery came when I found a thick leather-bound album beneath the floorboards of the closet. I almost didn't open it. My hands trembled as I lifted the cover, revealing photographs of my mother from before I was born. There she was, young, carefree, smiling in the arms of a man who wasn't my father. Her eyes sparkled in those pictures in a way I'd never seen. She wasn't the woman who had raised me. She was someone else entirely. The further I flipped through the album, the more confused I became. There were photos of her and this man, Ethan's father, the same man I'd seen in the hospital records, the same name I'd found in the adoption papers. But why was she smiling like this? Why was she so happy with him when all she'd ever shown me was distance? I paused on one photo. My mother, holding a child, Ethan. And in the corner, in smaller print, was a date, July 1984. The same year she'd abandoned him. It hit me like a freight train. She wasn't just hiding Ethan from Daniel and me. She was hiding her own life, her own choices from everyone. From herself. Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't know if they were for her or for me. The realization that my mother hadn't just failed me, but had also failed herself. That was a different kind of grief. She'd never allowed herself to mourn Ethan, never allowed herself to heal from the decision that had shaped her entire life. She'd buried it deep inside her, letting it rot until it poisoned everything she touched. I slammed the album shut. I was tired of this, tired of her mistakes, tired of her secrets. It wasn't enough anymore to simply let go of the house. I needed to let go of her, completely, to stop pretending that her shadow still had power over me. The next morning, I called the real estate agent to begin the process of selling. I didn't tell Daniel, not yet. I wasn't ready to have that conversation. I wasn't ready to tell him that, while he had been too consumed by his own hurt, I had quietly been cutting the final ties between us and our past, between me and her. But just as I'd made the call to start the sale, another call came in. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway. "Is this my name?" a voice asked, its tone sharp and formal. "I'm with a law firm representing a client who claims to have an interest in the property you've recently inherited." My heart skipped a beat. I could feel a cold chill creep up my spine. "Yes," I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We represent Ethan," the lawyer began, but I cut him off before he could finish. "Ethan?" I repeated, the word echoing in my ears. "My brother, Ethan?" "No," the lawyer clarified. "Ethan Graham, the man your mother was involved with before her marriage. We're in possession of a legal document that suggests he may have a stake in her estate." My mind raced. Ethan! The Ethan! My mother's secret, buried for decades, had suddenly become far more real and far more dangerous than I had ever anticipated. "What document?" I asked, my voice trembling despite myself. "We'll be in touch," the lawyer said, and the line went dead. The call left me reeling, my head spinning. I stumbled to the table and collapsed into the chair. A stake in the estate. What was he talking about? And why had he waited until now to come forward? I thought back to everything I'd learned. Ethan's adoption, the hidden letters, the bracelet. What did it all mean? Had my mother left more behind than just the house? Had she made arrangements that no one knew about? Did Ethan have a claim to anything in this house? Did he deserve a part of the life my mother had created after abandoning him? I sat in stunned silence for what felt like hours, trying to piece everything together, and then it clicked. Ethan Graham, the man my mother had loved and lost, the one she could never let go of. Was there a will that left him something? Was there a clause that he had hidden for all these years? Had my mother been preparing for the moment she would finally make things right with him? I didn't know how long I sat there, the air in the room growing thicker and heavier. But the truth was becoming undeniable. This wasn't just about me and Daniel. This wasn't about a house or inheritance anymore. This was about a family, an unspoken history, and the pieces of a broken puzzle that had been scattered for years. I had thought I was free to move on, free to leave all of this behind. But now, I was tangled in something far deeper, something I hadn't even begun to understand. The doorbell rang, and my world tilted once again. I wasn't ready for it. Not at all. The doorbell rang again, its sound piercing the silence of the house like a sudden crack in a still night. My heart raced, a mix of anticipation and dread clawing at my insides. I hadn't expected anyone. I wasn't prepared for another layer of complication. Not today. Not after everything that had happened in the last few days. I stood up, my legs feeling weak beneath me, as if the weight of the past few days had finally caught up with me. The call from the lawyer, the revelations about Ethan, everything felt like it was unraveling in a way I couldn't control. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. My mind raced. Was this Ethan? The man from the other end of the phone line? The person my mother had never told me about? The ghost in her past? I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my nerves before opening the door. When I did, I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Standing there, with an air of quiet confidence, was a man in his late 40s. His dark eyes were intense, and his posture was straight, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. He had the look of someone who had been through battles, someone who wasn't easily intimidated. But there was something in his gaze, something that made me feel like I was staring into the depths of a life I didn't fully understand. "Are you my name?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost too calm. It was the kind of voice that didn't rush, that didn't need to prove anything. "I am," I replied, my throat dry. "Can I help you?" The man looked at me, studying me in a way that made me feel like I was the one being examined, like he could see through all the walls I'd carefully built over the years. His gaze softened just slightly, but there was no warmth in it, just a quiet understanding. "I'm Ethan," he said, and the world seemed to shift. Ethan, the name I'd only just learned, the name tied to every question I had about my mother, every mystery that had remained unsolved. I froze. It felt like a blow to my chest, a shockwave that rippled through me. This was him. This was the man who had been the part of my mother's life, a part she had never let me see. "Ethan," I repeated, the word sounding foreign on my tongue. "I didn't expect—" He cut me off before I could finish my sentence, his voice still calm, but with an edge to it now. "I didn't expect to be standing here either. But here we are." He stepped past me without waiting for an invitation, as though he had every right to be in the house. I couldn't move, couldn't say anything. He walked into the living room, glancing around as if he were looking for something, anything. He took it all in with a quiet curiosity that unnerved me. "I've been trying to get in touch with you," he continued, his voice softer now. "But I suppose you've been busy." I blinked, trying to gather my thoughts. I didn't know who you were until recently. The lawyer called me yesterday. Ah, the lawyer, he said, nodding as if the mention of his name somehow confirmed something important. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. Your mother and we didn't have much time together, but we had enough. His words hit me like a slap. My mind raced, trying to process everything. This was the man who had been a part of her life, the man she had loved before she married my father, the man who, by all accounts, had been the reason my mother had never been able to move forward. Why didn't you tell me about him? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The question had been building inside me for days, but now that I had the chance to ask, it felt too heavy to bear. Ethan met my gaze with a strange mixture of sadness and acceptance. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the room as if searching for something he had lost. She never could, he said quietly as though he were speaking to himself. She never could face what we had. She couldn't reconcile the past with the life she wanted to build. So she buried it. And I let her. There was a long silence. I felt it between us, thick and suffocating, filled with unsaid words and unspoken grief. He looked at me then, his eyes more intense than ever. I'm not here to ask for anything, he said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. I'm not here for the house, the money, or whatever else your mother left behind. I came because I need you to understand something. I felt my pulse quicken, the weight of his words settling over me like a storm about to break. What is it? I asked, my voice steady despite the churning inside me. Ethan hesitated, then took a step closer. I came because there's a truth your mother never told you, a truth I don't think she ever meant for you to know. I swallowed hard. What truth? He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out to me, and for a moment I just stared at it, unsure of whether to take it. Finally, I reached out and took the paper, unfolding it with shaky hands. The letter was old, yellowed with age, but the ink was still legible. And as I read, my heart stopped. It was a letter from my mother to Ethan, but it wasn't just any letter. It was a confession, a letter she had never intended to send, a letter she had hidden away, tucked into the deepest corner of her life. In it, she wrote of regrets, of love, of the child she had given up for adoption, the child she had never stopped loving, despite everything she had tried to convince herself of. She had written to Ethan, telling him that the decision to leave him and their child had been the hardest thing she had ever done, and that she would always carry the burden of that choice. But there was more. She had written that she had never truly moved on, that no matter how many years had passed, no matter how much time had gone by, Ethan had always been the one who had held her heart, and she had asked him, pleaded with him, to understand that her decision wasn't about him. It was about her, about the life she had built with my father, a life she had believed she needed to protect at all costs. But the final line of the letter was what made my breath catch in my throat. I hope one day when you're ready, you'll forgive me, and you'll let our son know the truth about who he is. I could barely breathe as the weight of the words settled in. Our son. Ethan looked at me, his expression unreadable. You're not the only one she left behind, you know. I had to live with that too. And then it all fell into place. The truth about Ethan, about my mother's secret, my true brother, the child she'd abandoned years before, was someone I never even knew existed. This was only the beginning of the storm. The protagonist has evolved significantly over the course of the story. Initially driven by the desire for justice, the thirst for revenge now morphs into a need for closure, redemption, and the restoration of the emotional balance that was disrupted by years of betrayal. The hero has learned to see beyond the need for vengeance, no longer seeking just to punish, but to expose the truth and reclaim personal dignity. This final victory isn't about the destruction of enemies for their own sake. It's about breaking free from the shackles of the past. As for the antagonists, those who sought to undermine and betray the hero, this is where their fall from grace is both dramatic and complete. They're exposed, their deceptions laid bare, and their hold on power crumbles. The villain, once confident and controlling, is now powerless and publicly shamed. The corrupt figures who once operated from a position of strength are now reduced to mere shadows of their former selves. In this finale, the hero isn't alone. Support comes from unexpected places. The hero's ally, perhaps a figure who had been neutral or even distant at the start, now stands by them, offering unwavering support. This ally sees the protagonist not as a victim, but as someone who finally stood up for themselves, fought for what they deserved, and won. The culmination of the protagonist's efforts comes in the form of a calculated and well-timed confrontation. With all the pieces of the puzzle finally in place, the hero uses their accumulated knowledge and resources to expose the antagonist's biggest flaw, their arrogance and overconfidence. The antagonist, who'd always been one step ahead, overlooks a critical piece of the puzzle, making a fatal mistake in the process. They expose themselves, whether it's through a slip of the tongue, a document left behind, or a betrayer in their ranks. The hero uses this mistake as the final weapon to dismantle everything the antagonist has built. The villain is publicly shamed, their reputation destroyed. Whether through a shocking revelation in the press, a legal battle that strips them of everything they once held dear, or a masterstroke of manipulation by the hero, the antagonist is left with nothing. They lose their power, their wealth, their position. Their closest allies turn against them, and their family, once a source of pride, shuns them in the face of the public outcry. The protagonist, standing tall in this moment of triumph, feels a bittersweet satisfaction. They've reclaimed their life, their dignity, and their place in the world. The pain of their past isn't completely gone, but they've moved beyond the need for revenge. Instead, they find a peace they never thought possible, knowing that they've made things right. In the aftermath, the protagonist's life begins to shift. They've taken the necessary steps to rebuild, not only their reputation, but their personal sense of peace. Whether it's a move to a new city, a fresh start in a new career, or simply taking the time to heal and reconnect with the people who truly matter, the hero is no longer defined by their past. They've gained a sense of freedom and a renewed sense of purpose. The world around the protagonist reacts with mixed emotions. Some people are in awe of their strength and resilience, while others, perhaps those who were complicit in the antagonist's schemes, are left scrambling to pick up the pieces of their own shattered lives. The protagonist's enemies are now out of the picture, but their actions have left a lasting ripple effect on everyone involved. There's a subtle twist to the end, a message or event that keeps the audience guessing. Maybe the antagonist, having lost everything, tries to reach out for one last chance at redemption. Or maybe a new conflict emerges from the ashes of the old one. The protagonist isn't free of all challenges, but now they have the tools to face whatever comes next. They've proven their resilience, and with that, they hold the upper hand. The final lines of the story should carry the weight of everything the protagonist has been through, everything they've learned, and the emotional release they've earned. The villain, broken and humiliated, might try one final plea for understanding or redemption. Perhaps they beg for forgiveness or attempt to twist the narrative in their favor. But the protagonist has moved beyond the point of sympathy. They no longer need to justify their actions or seek approval. They've already won. As the villain walks away, defeated, the protagonist delivers the final words, words that strike like a thunderclap, echoing with the gravity of everything that has transpired. You had your chance to do the right thing, but now, it's my turn to walk away from you. Oh, you'll never get another chance. The words hang in the air, final and unyielding. The story closes with the protagonist standing tall, no longer burdened by the past, but ready to face whatever future lies ahead, knowing they've secured their own redemption and justice.